Good evening. Yes, as Mayor Corby said, we're going to go over the 2020 full year results for the CFO report. Hopefully, this will provide you with our financial position at the end of 2020. A small disclaimer here, these are, as of now, estimates. These are best estimate. We don't expect material variances, but our financial audit hasn't wrapped up. Once it wraps up in June, we will come forward with our financial statements, official on our website, and that is when no more changes will be allowed to these numbers. So the first slide, so how do we do on tax revenue? As you know, we were very concerned at the beginning of the pandemic of where we were gonna end. The long story short, we ended up 0.1% favorable to budget. That said, that's about 1.8% below budget, and that's the chart on your right that you say it compares to year over year, 1.8% decrease, but to budget we're favorable given our conservative budget practices. The table on your left side has all the sales tax revenues, first, second, third penny, and the bid tax, and then the property tax. The budget amounts are the next two columns. The actuals are the third column. The yellow columns are if we were favorable or unfavorable versus budget. So the story here, like I said, we're favorable versus budget, kind of flat. And if we add on the property taxes, we're $103,000 favorable to budget, or 0.6%. It is important to note that these numbers include a settlement from previous years of about $144,000. Without that one, our sales tax revenue would be 2.8% lower than last year, or 0.9% below budget. And this slide changed from the previous one that we sent earlier to City Council. I apologize for that, but we just wanted to provide a snapshot by industry. How do we do? And as we can see, the agriculture, the construction, and the wholesale trade industries increase year over year, but we did see declines in retail trade, and I guess all across the board. The most material one was retail trade, which declined about 6% year over year, and that's about 60% of our tax revenue there. So that said, how do we do compared to the US as a whole? The table at the top shows that for the last two years, we've been outperforming real GDP growth. So the first row, it's the City of Brookings sales tax revenue year over year, the growth. We experienced 3.5 growth in 18, 4.8 growth in 19, and then a decline of 1.8 in 20. That compares to GDP of growth in 18 of 3%, 19 2.2%, and then in 20, 3.5%. So the story here is that we outperform our US market. That said, we're still not out of the woods, and we have forward outlook in later slides of how we're planning for 2021. Also important to note that inflation in 2020 was the lowest inflation experience in the last 3 years, and it's just half of what it was in 2018, which should help to keeping our prices a little bit lower. All right, and lastly, I would like to provide you with an overview, a quick overview of our sales tax performance metric. This metric is part of an overall initiative by the city of providing key metrics so that our citizens could see how we're performing as a city in terms of our targets. This initiative as a whole will be showcased at a later this quarter at a public meeting. But for now, I'd like to focus on the sales tax performance metric, which can be accessed through the link listed here. And it contains year-by-year comparison by tax type, industry, as well as details of the hospitality industry and the remote sellers' online tax activity. That one is a new data point, and you can see it on the lower right bottom. We started receiving this data since October last year from the state. And as you can see, for example, in January this year, we received about $76,000 for remote sellers, which is the internet tax, put in other words. And that is about 6% of our first and second penny revenue. We don't have any year-over-year comparisons, so hopefully over time, we will be able to compare how it behaves over time. All right, so next is like, well, how do we do in the general fund? And as a reminder for everybody, the general fund is where we fund key operations for the city. So the table here shows to the left our departments of the city, and we list all the expenditures. The first two columns, again, is the budget. Then the third column, it's how did we do compared to budget. The yellow one, it says if we're favorable is negative or blue, and then unfavorable would be black. The percentage of total spend, and then the last column on the right, it's the revenue. How do we do against plan? So in terms of expenses, if we go all the way to the bottom, our total expense was at 88% of the total budget, which is about a $2.3 million surplus versus budget. The main driver of this is our department heads' efforts and city manager to reduce their budgets proactively back in March for the unforeseen expected revenue declines. We also had other drivers, which were vacancies that amounted to be about $644,000, and the closing of the recreational facilities during COVID. That was around $426,000 of expense that didn't happen. In terms of revenues, we were $4.1 million higher. This is mainly driven by the $3.8 million for the COVID reimbursed expense from the CARES Act. This helped offset around $400,000 in declining fees that were planned to be collected because of all these recreational programs. So at the end of the day, we were about 88% of expense or budgeted expense used. And a little bit more detail on the Corona Relief Fund. So as a reminder, the state allocated us about $5.5 million based on our population. Our goal was to maximize it 100%. Unfortunately, because of the restrictions with it, we were able to get about 75% or $4.1 million. This was a joint effort with a number of city entities. The city ended up receiving $3.8 million of these, 4.1, BMU, $193,000, the health system, $120,000, and Beta, $16,000. More detail on what was reimbursed or not is included in the appendix in the presentation, in case you have any questions. Recently, the news said that there's a new COVID relief package going on. It is expected to have about $350 billion for state and municipalities, but we don't know. I mean, it hasn't passed. They're expecting to be signed by the end of this week, but we don't know the rules around this amount. The next slide shows on the left side is the CIP fund, which funds more all of our capital investment projects, and then all other funds are grouped together in the second line. So we'd like to start with the CIP fund. All the way to the right, you see that it was used about 65.6%. So that ended up with a surplus of $3.4 million. So the surplus was driven by, again, early costs due to COVID. That was about $1.3 million. We tried to reactivate some of these projects, and some of them did happen on the second half of last year, but others, because of timing, we couldn't bring back. Most of these work that couldn't be brought back, it's in the form of the amendment number 2 that's getting approved today, hopefully, to carry forward that work or to do that work. If we look on the right, the favorability was driven by street improvements, about $1.5 million. The infrastructure risk fund that we build every year by $250, and we're just accumulating it in case of, for unplanned maintenance. That's about $500,000 that we're carrying forward to this year. The Sweetfield Center infrastructure was reduced by $300,000. Park and rec improvements around $250,000. And fire department infrastructure about $230,000. And then lastly, as a whole, the city is about 86% or 87% of total budgeted spend. All right, so the Swiftfield Center, how did they perform this year? I gotta say that despite an extremely challenging year for its industry, they finished the year at $107 surplus versus budget. And you can see that on the third column all the way to the bottom. The first column has the year-to-date actuals, the second column has the budget, and then the third one is the difference year over year. So how do they manage to do that great? So kudos to the Swiftfield-centered leadership team who proactively, even though revenues were down around 27% year over year, they were able to secure a PPP loan that will hopefully be transformed into a grant. They recruited 2 national cattle shows. They provided disinfecting services to the city facilities, and they also provided ICAP meals to offset that revenue decline. They were also proactive in reducing expenses by around $760,000, which resulted I mean, this was driven by cost reduction initiatives, which included payroll and personnel adjustments. But we also acknowledge that we're not out of the woods yet, and in 2021, at least the first half is going to be challenging for them. So Tom and team are working on reviewing their business plan and making adjustments as needed. And talking about 2021, as a reminder, back in September when we had to budget for 2021, we were conservative. And in 2021, we did bake in some growth, but it wasn't the same growth that we'd experienced in 2018 or 2019. So for first and second penny, we baked in 5.3% growth from what we estimated at construction in 2020 of 8%. This represents about a 66% growth or recovery from the previous year. 3B and bid taxes, given the nature of the industry, their growth, their recovery is about 50% of their declines from last year. So far in January, the tax receipts, and these are the 2 tables in the bottom, has been actually lower than last year. As you can see in the first and second penny for January, it's 2.3% and 2% below last year. But fortunately, given our budgeting practices, they are above budget. So we're about 2 and 2.2% above budget. Unfortunately, 3B it still hasn't recovered. It's 20% or almost 21% below last year and 6.2 below budget. And the bid tax is 14% below last year and 15% above budget. So with that, I would encourage our citizens to continue supporting on restaurants and our bars. So hopefully we can reverse this initial trend for this year for the 3B. And lastly, the City Council priority project list. As a reminder, this whole list, it's funded by the unassigned cash that we're left with at the end of the year. And in simple terms, is after we take out all our needed reserves or all our liabilities, then we're left with this bucket of cash, if you put it that way, where we can fund the City Council's priority projects. So I'd like to start at the top left. And since we haven't closed our 2020 audit, we're starting with the 2019 unassigned reserves or free cash, if we put it that way, of $9.7 million. We take out the 20% reserves that we need to have per our financial policy for reserves. And then the fourth row, it's what we're estimating at this point to end 2020 for our general fund. That's about $3.2 million of surplus that's added to the pile. And then we take a 20% variance factor just to be conservative, since those numbers are not final. At the end of the day, currently we're estimating to have $8.8 million to fund the City Council priority projects. Now the second table down from the left, it's the City Council approved projects. And these are projects that formal action has been taken. And the only projects that we have right now is the 2021 facility improvements, which are a result of the McKinsey study that they conducted last year. It's about $1.4 million, and this was approved during the budget back in September. After these approved projects, we end up with a balance of $7.4 million to fund the primary projects. And these projects are listed in the darker blue on the bottom left table, and these are listed in priority order based on staff recommendation and our meetings with City Council. We start with the 2022 facility improvements from the McKinsey study. That's 1.1 million. The fire department training tower, that's 440,000. The public safety center, that's estimated to be $7 million. The housing study, $25,000. The food bank, $300,000. The downtown master plan, $35,000. And the indoor rec facility, about $850,000. All these primary projects add up to be $9.7 million. So if we do the math, top right, we ended up at a deficit of $2.3 million if we were to fund all the primary projects. And again, just funding them with our available cash. There are other means to fund if City Council has the appetite to do them all. But that's just, it's the balance, assuming that we'll use all the available cash, estimated available cash. Now, the next two, the next one in yellow are the secondary projects in order of priority. That's if we were to have more availability of cash, these would be the next in line to be funded. And then the last bottom right table are the desired projects by staff that would be funded if we win the lottery, I suppose. With that, I'll stand by for questions.
Councilmember Brink.
Just a note on that last table there, are listed. Would I understand that those would not be in any part of the facility improvements from the above table?
Correct.
Okay, very good. And then just a comment, I wanted to say thank you for all of your work presenting this and editing after the City Council retreat. It, to me, really speaks volumes that staff was extremely prudent with the budget and the reserves and the savings measures early on. And that's why we're fortunate enough to have some money to still play with here at the end of the day. So thank you for your efforts.
Correct. Yeah.
Councilmember Wendell.
I had a question about some of the COVID relief funds referenced on slide 8 and then broken down further in the appendix.
Okay. Slide, sorry.
I noticed that we referenced $193,000 from Brookings Municipal Utilities. Thought maybe in the appendix that might list some expenses related to the forgiveness or the waiving of utility costs that might have been waived for citizens in the spring. I know there was some discussion locally about BMU having to incur those costs. I was curious if they didn't come from these federal relief dollars, where did BMU recoup those costs? Or do we have a sense of what a dollar amount we're not able to pay the utility bills in the spring and summer?
And I'm unaware of that situation. I know that the rules were very strict that this was not to fund revenue replacement, at least this, I guess, package or this grant. We can follow up with BMU, but they were aware of all the rules that we were subject to, and they try to maximize everything as well. But I don't know if they were able to find a source to offset that.
I think maybe at some point when we're doing a reflection back on costs that were incurred or revenues lost over this 2-year window, that would be something of interest to me to understand how it impacted a municipal utility company. The other question I had was related to beta services, and I noticed that they received about $16,000, but I also saw recent communication that they're providing transportation to and from vaccine appointments in the community. Will there be cost recovery for the beta service from some source for that transportation?
Once again, Eric can talk to this, but I will tell you first, our team was outstanding at trying to go through all the loopholes as much as possible that the state put in front of us. I should walk back. I'm very, very grateful for what the state provided us for funding opportunities, but there was a lot of restrictions. And so this money did go to beta, but we had to actually work with Boys and Girls Club. We had to work with a bunch of different outside entities in order to even get that $16,000. I'm not sure if, I know Beta won't be able to tap into these dollars because it's already done. In fact, the state hasn't even told us what they're going to do with the remaining funds. My assumption is they're going to put it in a pool where you allocate it throughout the state. So I'm not aware yet if they'll be able to get reimbursed for it. It'll be something of interest. to the extent the city probably won't even be able to might not be able to get reimbursed for the use of SwiftTel as well. And so we're making those submissions. We're holding on to the receipts, potentially make the submissions in the future, but it might be something that we all have to just consume. But I can surely follow back up once I hear from Beta.
Thank you.
And if I can add, the $16,000 that they actually did end up receiving, originally no funding for any agency, and through conversations with the state, we were able to highlight the services that Beta provides, and this $16,000 come from COVID-related transportation. We were able to prove that. So I'm not promising anything, but if we do have a second relief, we know the rules, and hopefully we can maximize that as well.
Councilmember Bacon, you were next, then Niemeyer, and then Collins.
That's fine. I just wanted to thank you. Each year you get so much better at this and make it readable and understandable for we lay people who don't live and breathe and eat this like you do every day. So thank you very much for
Appreciate it.
that.
Councilman Niemeyer.
So let's go to slide 4. The bar graph of the tax revenue by industry.
I apologize. We changed that slide. It didn't have the right information, and we realized that
okay,
this
all right.
morning. Yeah.
So, Eric, we have wholesale trade at 147%. I mean, describe entities that would be part of the wholesale tribe or trade.
Yes, so I was reading that there's one thing that it's important to note. It's growing. So we
Okay.
did have a question into the state to see what the component of that is, and let me look at that. So it was mostly electrical equipment, plumbing equipment, air heating, industrial supplies. That's basically what makes that category. There's not much more than we can get besides those very generic. My gut tells me that it's sort of a reclassification between the retail and the wholesale trade, but that's as deep as we can get.
Right. Okay. And then retail, it shows now that we have 5.7% decrease. Whereas on this one, on my bar graph, it said 3.5. This must have gotten adjusted then after we had December's numbers then?
Yes, I apologize. Those numbers are the ones that we're sending the packages was for this year.
Okay.
As we were reviewing the content this morning, we realized that the chart that should be
All right.
accurate is this one. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Eric.
No, thank you, and apologize for that.
Councilman Collins.
Yeah, Eric, I just wanted to echo, I think you did a wonderful job here. This is the first time I've seen something like this, and it's easy to understand, for me anyways. I was pleasantly surprised to see that the SwiftTel Center had a surplus. I wasn't expecting that. The folks did a good job out there, and you as well, making that work. So I just want to thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, and I would like to pass it on to my peers. I mean, this is a team effort result. Like everybody was, when we had to have those difficult conversations, everybody came to the table. So made it a lot easier. Thank you, appreciate it.
City Manager.
Mayor Corbett.
Okay, go ahead, Councilman Tiltonburn.
Sorry, I just wanted to echo the sentiments of the readability of this report. Eric, thank you for the hard work you put into this and for presenting it so clearly and concisely. I hope that the kind of dive into this as well, because I do think it gives a good snapshot of what the year was. And then I want to extend my thanks to the entire city staff and department heads for all of the work that you all did throughout the entire year to make sure that our budget did end up looking so favorably during a year where we had such challenges. So thank you across the board for all the hard work that was done.
Now, City Manager.
Thank you. Eric, can you go back to that link? I just want to hit on it real quick. So city council members and the public watching this, I'd really encourage you to go check out this link. It's a little insight, as Eric mentioned. and to the performance metrics that we're going to present later this month, early next month. And what's neat about this link is it actually gives you interactive capabilities to see what each month was for dollar amounts compared to previous year, and really gives you more insight. And our plan is to update this quarterly so that citizens can see how this thing is evolving with all of our different revenue sources. So that's number one. Number two is, just as Holly said, our staff and our department heads did a phenomenal job, tightening their belts, trying to ensure that we're in the greatest financial position possible for the foreseeable future, while ensuring that we're not impacting our citizens and the services they desire. But finally, the state legislature did also pass some legislation this year that allows us to have the budget process completed rather than October, later on in the year, which will allow us, as Eric mentioned on one of these slides, we're doing our best guess on how sales tax is going to end. We start in April with some of those projections. We refine it through June and July. This allows us to push it off a little bit further, and have better estimates for you, and have a more concise and accurate budget for you. So those are things to consider as we move forward through this year's budget process.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rangel.